Good and evil. We're going to talk about it. It's time to up our dialogue.
This is the Up Your Dialogue podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Up Your Dialogue podcast. The topic tonight is good and evil. Does it really exist? Are these ideas that we've just created in our own minds as human beings? Are we the final arbiters of what's good and what is evil? Well, we're going to discuss it on the Up Your Dialogue podcast. My name is L.A. Londy. I'm here with J. Scott Harden, my co-host here on the podcast. If you're not familiar with the podcast, we come from this in two different worldviews, two different lenses, the agnostic view and the Christian worldview, the biblical worldview. And so it's very interesting to discuss ideas like this or topics like this on the podcast from these two vantage points. The reason that we're talking about this topic, this particular podcast, is because we have it on full display from Tucker Carlson, who was recently fired from Fox News, although some people will say maybe he's not fired, maybe he's just put on leave, and maybe we'll get into some of those details. And also some events that have taken place, one being Satancon 2023 in Boston, Massachusetts. And we also had the Met Gala go on as well. And what we noticed as I was having discussions with J. Scott through the week, as we normally do, that these were two very different worldviews going on here about what is actually good and evil, how it exists in the world, and how we see it from our lenses. And so we thought it would be a great topic to discuss. We often broach topics like these on the podcast, although we've done 20-something podcasts, all of them audio version, by the way. This is only the second one that we've done with video. We have one previous podcast we did with video that by now, hopefully, you'll be able to watch. These things take some time to edit, but what we do is we just go back and forth and talk about the topics. We just have a general structure. We don't really have a framework for how we're going to discuss it. Although we are going to reference some speeches from Tucker Carlson. We're also going to reference quotes and happenings from Satancon. And we're going to play those for you. And then we're going to discuss what we think about them and the conclusions that we draw. Sometimes the interesting part is, although we have two different worldviews, oftentimes we agree as human beings as to conclusions from these things. So what we're going to do now is we're going to throw it over to Jay Scott with his initial comments on this idea of good and evil and the events that we've witnessed this week. Oh, you're on. Jay Scott, you're on.
Well,
Yeah, there we go.
I don't know why I do this, but the time little Marco did that and hit his water has always been appealing to me because it gives me a little hope because I don't know anything about recordings either. And so maybe they don't see the water even though the camera's on. But
I think that ended his political ambitions for president.
He still works for the great state of Florida. So
but president is not something that's in view any longer because of the water bottle, I think.
He ran for president. That didn't work out. I was not really in favor of the Donald calling him out as Little Marco or other names, and yet it did kind of stick, and the water bottle thing was fishy.
Little Marco.
But still, as an amateur videographer in a studio with a camera, I like the idea that not everyone knows what they're doing at first. I think that was probably Marco Rubio's, 400,000th time on front of a camera, but whatever.
Also, do you remember Bobby Jindal? He had a camera moment. Didn't he have a camera moment?
What was the deal?
Or he had a failed moment on camera, Bobby Jindal, where he was looking all goofy. He just kind of looked goofy in front of the camera, and I think that he was really popular for a while, and that sort of ended his presidential ambitions.
It's high stakes when you're in front of a camera, apparently. So we used to do this audio version, and we did that because we were not living in the same geographical area, and now we have a combined UYD studios, and so we have the ability to be here jointly in person in a room. And so we're going to try it like that for a while and see what comes of it. Today is May the 4th, so to any Star Wars fans out there, May the 4th be with you, is what they say. And aside from the Tucker and Temple issues that we'll get into, we have also a new world chess champion. This past week was won in a very closely contested and seesaw back and forth match between Ian Pomniachtchi and newly crowned world champion Ding Liren. I mentioned Ding because he won this match, and some of the games are beautiful and intricate and ornate, and chess fans will like it. But for the first time, historically, we have a male world chess champion who is Chinese. The reigning female chess champion is also Chinese. So now, finally, it's official that China is the maximum chess power in the world. And so my hat is off to new world champion Ding Liren, whose games are beautiful and instructive for the rest of us. But it's a new world. And it's a world in which we don't hear, "Good evening, it's Tucker Carlson. Guess what happened today?" That's out the window. And Tucker is no longer on air, having been removed by the executives at Fox. And we're going to talk about some of the material just before and after the firing of Tucker. The before one, where he speaks to the Heritage Foundation that LA has focused on and studied, and also the Twitter statement that Tucker came out with after the firing, which is a 2-minute clip that we'll show, and we get a little sense of what was going on with Tucker a little tiny bit before and a tiny bit after his dismissal.
Yeah, that's right. I think the reason that we're going to show this is because what Tucker is explaining is his idea of good and evil, which is the topic tonight. And so you're going to get his worldview, is the way I like to express it. Everybody has a worldview. Everybody, you might think you don't have a worldview, but you do. It's how you perceive the world. You may not think of it from a religious standpoint or from an agnostic standpoint. You may not have those words in your mind, but you see the world in a certain way. And you may not think you have a belief system, but you really do. How you think about things, how the world works, what the purpose of things are, what your morality is. I mean, all these things are ideas that human beings think about, that come into their minds, and how you process those, and ultimately your conclusions on those formulate what your worldview is. What we're going to see here from Tucker Carlson is how he starts to explain the worldview that he has through politics, through issues, and the impacts that he thinks it has on the world in general. So what we're going to do first is play his post video. After he was fired, he had just a small video, maybe 2 minutes long, not really stating the reasons that he had for being fired, but just kind of explaining what he thinks is behind what goes on in the world and possibly what goes on behind the issues of the day. So we're just going to get a little taste of Tucker here, starting from the beginning of his speech, and play it for you. And then we'll come back and talk about this one. And then we'll go back in time to Friday, I believe, the Friday before his firing, where he gave a speech at the Heritage Foundation, which some people say could potentially be the reason for his firing. And maybe we'll get into a little bit of Rupert Murdoch and what might have gone on behind the scenes between Friday and Monday, because it was very clear from the last show that Tucker gave that he was not planning or had no knowledge of actually being fired. So let's see what Tucker had to say to the world right after his firing from Fox News.
Good evening, it's Tucker Carlson. One of the first things you realize when you step outside the noise for a few days is how many genuinely nice people there are in this country. Kind and decent people, people who really care about what's true, and a bunch of hilarious people also, a lot of those. It's got to be the majority of the population, even now. So that's heartening. The other thing you notice when you take a little time off is how unbelievably stupid most of the debates you see on television are. They're completely irrelevant. They mean nothing. In 5 years, we won't even remember that we had them. Trust me, as someone who's participated. And yet at the same time, and this is the amazing thing, the undeniably big topics, the ones that will define our future, get virtually no discussion at all. War, civil liberties, emerging science, demographic change, corporate power, natural resources. When was the last time you heard a legitimate debate about any of those issues? It's been a long time. Debates like that are not permitted in American media. Both political parties and their donors have reached consensus on what benefits them, and they actively collude to shut down any conversation about it. Suddenly, the United States looks very much like a one-party state. That's a depressing realization, but it's not permanent. Our current orthodoxies won't last. They're brain dead. Nobody actually believes them. Hardly anyone's life is improved by them. This moment is too inherently ridiculous to continue, and so it won't. The people in charge know this. That's why they're hysterical and aggressive. They're afraid. They've given up persuasion. They're resorting to force. But it won't work. When honest people say what's true, calmly and without embarrassment, they become powerful. At the same time, the liars who've been trying to silence them shrink, and they become weaker. That's the iron law of the universe. True things prevail. Where can you still find Americans saying true things? There aren't many places left, but there are some, and that's enough.
All right, so those are the words from Tucker Carlson right after, maybe the day after he was fired from Fox News, for reasons we think we may know, but who knows really what went on behind the scenes. Maybe we'll talk about that if it matters later in the podcast. But I think the ideas that we want to bring out of this speech is the idea of what is true and how nobody really believes what's going on in the media and what's being told to us. How we have when he says one party, he's not really talking Republican Democrats. He's really talking about those who are in charge of what we actually see and hear, and how that really makes up what truth is for some. How do you know what you're hearing is true? How do you know what you're seeing is true? What are you putting that up against? What is your source for truth? Tucker is sort of hinting at that without coming directly out and saying it. What actually is your idea of what's true? And are we searching for it as human beings? I think most of us are. I know Tucker is. Tucker's show was primarily truth-seeking. That's why it was so popular. It wasn't necessarily Republican or Democrat, although he's obviously conservative, but it was Tucker trying to get to the truth and saying what he thought he needed to say that was truth. And that rubbed people the wrong way a lot. That made him talk about things that other hosts wouldn't talk about. A host like Sean Hannity, who I just found out, by the way, yesterday, whose ratings have lost several 100,000 people since Tucker was fired. So that leads you to believe that some people were just tuning into Hannity because they were watching Tucker. Because Sean Hannity is more of a talking point guy, where he's kind of saying what the network wants him to say, and Tucker's saying what he believes is true, which is going to lead us to the idea of how do we acknowledge what is true, especially in this world that we live in, where truth is sometimes seen as relative, where there isn't an absolute truth. And Tucker's getting to a point of absolute truth, where later on in his speech that we're going to see in the Heritage Foundation, which happened before this, he's talking about the ideas of good and evil and how that relates to truth, which we don't really have a very good concept of in our culture today. So I don't know. Let's get from Jay Scott his initial ideas or thoughts about Tucker and this good and evil topic.
Right. Two takeaways from the Tucker Twitter speech, the 2-minute thing that we just heard, for me, are number one, the notion of finding truth or value from today's forum on the public debate stage is irrelevant. And what that means is you cannot really trust that anything meaningful will come out of various parties debating on a big public network, because somebody is operating the strings behind the scenes. And we'll talk about that, but in point number two. But in the case of debate, we remember that Tucker Carlson partly came to prominence and crossed people's radar with his version of Crossfire. And this was a case where someone from the right and someone from the left in the political spectrum would sit down in public and debate a few key issues of the day. And Tucker was of the right, representing that. And I remember I went back and had a look at the episode of Crossfire where the Democrat was Clinton advisor Paul Begala and Tucker on the other side. And they had a guest that day, which was Jon Stewart. And Jon Stewart came on with a kind of truth to power, I'm a comedian, so don't take me seriously, but I'll clobber you when you're not looking type of approach. Jon Stewart was a little bit too cool for school, and Jon Stewart called out this debate format and basically told Paul and Tucker on their own show that this type of debate format was irrelevant and meaningless, and soon the American public would be wise to it, and they would be wise to not watch it. And I remember Tucker was kind of laughing and a bit jovial and treated Stewart as a bit of a comedian with some commentary, which is what he was. But now, these many years later, Tucker's telling us not an altogether different message. He's saying that you're not going to find a real platform for honest and meaningful debate on one of these type of shows. You're going to have to find your source of truth elsewhere. And that's what Jon Stewart said. But when you see the comedian version, Stewart looks like he's there to tear down the system. And he doesn't accept either side as a source of truth. He thinks they're all in it for money or power, for other reasons, ratings. He doesn't take them seriously. And now having been released from Fox, now we hear that Tucker also doesn't take this debate forum seriously. So we didn't hear Tucker say that last week when he was on air, or the year before that, or while he was on Crossfire. But now that he's been dismissed, he confides to the listening public on this Twitter short that the debate stage is no longer meaningful. And as an agnostic, as a scientific-minded, inquiring thinker, it's important for me to hear multiple points of view about an issue and find out where they connect, especially when you're looking at multiple sources. Not only a thing of Crossfire, but you want to then look at a variety of news sources and find out where they touch, including sources foreign and domestic. And so when you lose an independent voice like Tucker on the Fox network, this presents an unfortunate problem for some of us, because finding the Hannitys of the world, I like Sean Hannity well enough, but he's kind of a party blowhard. And so he has a list of 5 talking points. They never vary. They're always versions or applications of the same theme. And so it's a little bit dull, but it's also going to be very limited to a point of view, a single approach. And Tucker wasn't really like that. He didn't toe the party line every time. He wasn't monolithic like that. And so what Tucker brought to the table for viewers was an outside, a sometimes libertarian, a sometimes controversial, intentionally so, and an oftentimes other point of view or frame of reference that one could then use to help get closer to the truth. And that's been snuffed out by our friends at the Fox network. So Tucker's main point about the debate stage does pose a problem for some of us.
Right. So we have the issue with truth and the idea that Tucker was always trying to get to what's true in his mind. So what's behind the idea of truth? Does it have anything to do with what's good and moral, and what is good and moral versus bad, like good versus bad, good versus evil, that type of thing? How do we actually formulate that? He gets more into it in the speech that he gave to the Heritage Foundation, which once again some people say is part of what got him fired. Now there's some ideas about text messages that have been unveiled or that were unveiled, and some weird thing about Rupert Murdoch's wife and how she was speaking about religious matters with Tucker at a dinner, and that spooked him. And then he heard the speech at the Heritage Foundation, and Rupert Murdoch has some mental issues himself and some different things going on. Anyway, in the Heritage Foundation speech, Tucker takes what he said in that 2-minute shot after he was fired, and I think what he does is he gets a little deeper, even though it happened before the Twitter video. This gets deeper into his worldview and why he's saying some of the things he did after he got fired. He kept it vague in 2 minutes. Heritage Foundation speech is like 30 minutes, but it gives you a deeper idea of what he's talking about when he's talking about truth, good, evil, and those sorts of things. So I think we're going to play that next, and then we're going to have some discussions about both videos. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take and sort of contrast this worldview and this idea of truth and good and evil with the displays of this going on at Satancon and things like that also happened this week.
Now, before we show this clip, let me just mention point number 2 from the Tucker Twitter thing, which is 1 about the debates, but 2, this one-party notion. When you lose voices, you're minimizing the ability to cross-reference sources of truth and data points. But as L.A. suggested, this doesn't seem to be the one-party thing, doesn't seem to have to do with Republicans and Democrats. It seems to be other than that. So it's not that the Republican voice is snuffed out or the Democratic voice is accentuated or one party's gaining an advantage over the other. The whole system could be rigged, I think, is Tucker's point. And that has to do possibly, in Tucker's worldview, with globalism. We hear on the Tucker show many, many times about the Carl Schwab and other forces of globalism that are overtaking information systems, economies, and culture. And maybe Tucker meant that in terms of the one party takeover, some agenda that is not the party you think of in your domestic policies, but just a larger kind of global agenda. What do you think about this, L.A.?
Well, Tucker certainly came out against that. And I think, once again, it was partially because he's trying to get to the truth behind these things when so much of it is not told to the American people about what's going on behind the scenes in this globalist agenda, the Carl Schwab's and what's the name of that foundation? It's escaping me right now.
I don't know. Is that the Illuminati, the European Union, the World Economic Forum?
World Economic Forum.
All right, whatever.
The World Economic Forum, Carl Schwab, and these people, these elites that get up and because of their position think that they have the end result of what everyone needs to hear is what they put out. And what Tucker was getting to is, well, that's often not the truth. It's often the case where it's not the truth. What you're being told by those people in the media and things like that is not the truth. And when he saw the difference between that, he thought it was important to put out there. And our discussion is going to go a little bit deeper into why that's important. Why is it important? Why can't we just, have an algorithm dictate whatever it is that you need to hear and see, and that becomes the truth? Because in reality, the truth is whatever we decide it is at the moment in time. And so I can tell you whatever I want to tell you about what's going on. Is it really happening in truth? Well, that doesn't matter. Whatever matters is what I tell you it is, because I can just make up truth as I go. Truth is all relative. It only has to do with what we say it is. And so I think in this regard, Tucker's trying to get to the bottom of a deeper idea of what's behind the truth. Is truth absolute? Is it only how we define it? And does it have to relate at all to morality, good, evil, and those type of things? And in the Heritage Foundation speech, he starts to get to the bottom of these things, which would spook a lot of people, I think, and wouldn't surprise me at all if the things that he said not necessarily got him fired, but was the nail in the coffin type thing. So let's hear what Tucker had to say at the end of the speech of the Heritage Foundation, and then we'll kind of put the two together and come up with a worldview from Tucker's perspective of these things, and then we'll talk about the opposite of that.
Or the largest crowd of people at all, which is the federal government, the largest human organization in human history, decide that the goal is to destroy things, destruction for its own sake. Hey, let's tear it down. What you're watching is not a political movement, it's evil. So if you want to assess, and I'll put it in and I'll stop with this. I'll put it in non-political, or non-specific theological terms, and just say, if you want to know what's evil and what's good, what are the characteristics of those? And by the way, I think the Athenians would have agreed with this. This is not necessarily just a Christian notion. This is kind of I would say, widely agreed upon understanding of good and evil. What are its products? What do these two conditions produce? Well, good is characterized by order, calmness, tranquility, peace, whatever you want to call it, lack of conflict, cleanliness. Cleanliness is next to godliness. It's true, it is. And evil is characterized by their opposites: violence, hate, disorder, division, disorganization, and filth. So if you are all in on the things that produce the latter basket of outcomes, what you're really advocating for is evil. That's just true. I'm not calling for religious war, far from it. I'm merely calling for an acknowledgement of what we're watching, which is not what, and I'm certainly not backing the Republican Party. I'm not making a partisan point at all. I'm just noting what's super obvious. Like those of us who are in our mid-50s are caught in the past in the way that we think about this. One side's like, no, I've got this idea, and we've got this idea, and let's have a debate about our ideas. They don't want a debate. Those ideas won't produce outcomes that any rational person would want under any circumstances. Those are manifestations of some larger force acting upon us. It's just so obvious. It's completely obvious. And I think two things. One, we should say that and stop engaging in these totally fraudulent debates where we are using the terms that we used in 1991 when I started at Heritage, as if maybe, I could just win the debate if I marshaled more facts. I've tried that, doesn't work. And two, maybe we should all take just like 10 minutes a day to say a prayer about it. I'm serious. Like, why not? And I'm saying that to you, not as some kind of evangelist. I'm literally saying that to you as an Episcopalian, the Samaritans of our time. I'm coming to you from the most humble and lowly theological position you can. I'm literally an Episcopalian, okay? And even I have concluded it might be worth taking just 10 minutes out of your busy schedule to say a prayer for the future, and I hope you will.
All right, so we have a lot there in a small period of time from Tucker on this idea of putting together truth, good, and evil, and how those three concepts and ideas are intertwined together in Tucker's worldview of behind the scenes you have good and evil forces at work, and what you're seeing play out in the politics of the day and the culture of the day is simply the outer manifestations of what's going on behind the scenes from a good and evil standpoint. And then he says that we should pray about it, which further lends you to the idea of what Tucker is saying is a spiritual concept. There are spiritual things at play. They're good and evil. They're outside of us. They're things that are manifested outside of us that impact us, that we then bring into our world through our politics, our culture, and what have you. And what Tucker is saying is that you can't, it's obvious, he says. Tucker says it's obvious. It's obvious to him that this is going on. It may not be obvious to everyone in the same way, but to Tucker it's very obvious that this is what's actually happening. So what's neat about this podcast is when we talk about this, we're going to talk about it from different worldviews and different perspectives about how what happens in our world actually takes place and manifests itself. Is it just something that we're doing, Jay Scott? Is this just something that we're that we just do every day? We just make decisions and everything is only from us out, and we just we define what's right and wrong, so it's not really absolute in any way. It's just subjective, and if not for human beings, this idea of good and evil wouldn't even exist. And the things that come out in the politics and the culture of the day are just manifestations of humans interacting with each other, and we're just molecules bumping into each other as we float around on this massive planet in space and time? Or is there something more spiritual behind it, which Tucker says, by the way, is completely obvious?
Yeah, it's interesting. The Twitter 2-minute blurb was a little bit vague and non-committal in terms of any type of religious, spiritual component, and in other ways, but it was only a 2-minute piece. The Heritage speech was much longer, 30 minutes or more, and at the beginning of the clip that LA just showed us, the Up Your Dialogue audience, and you should go back and have a look at this Heritage speech. I've heard, I didn't listen to the whole thing, but due to my workings with LA, I've heard parts of it and a good amount of it, and it was pretty amazing. But the first part of that speech that we heard the clip of, Tucker suggested that good and evil wasn't only a Christian phenomenon, although by the end of his clip, it's very obvious to him and to his listeners that he is referring to a spiritual and religious concept in good and evil. Ellie and I have talked about this over the years for a long time, and had contentions about how from where good and evil derive. And, good seems to be a more agreed upon term, but there's the nuance between the distinction between good and bad versus good and evil. And when terms like evil are used, or the soul is used, or even a term that sometimes we contend about, grace, is used, LA notes that I stick my hand in the grab bag of spiritual terms and pluck these out for my own use sometimes, which is true, but leads to deeper contention of, do Christians have a monopoly on the concept of what good and evil is in the first place? Well, you'll get a different answer from a Jew. You'll get a different answer from a Muslim. An agnostic tends to be more flexible in these matters. Nietzsche, you got it from a person who was not promoting of any type of Christian values, whose book is called Beyond Good and Evil. When you look at nature and you see the animal kingdom, one animal eats the other one because it's hungry or needs territory for whatever reason. One animal succeeds and the other one gets eaten. Nobody really thinks about that as evil, good versus evil. They think about it as the survival of the member of the species in question, and somebody ate the other guy and that was dinner. But there wasn't a moral code to it. With humans, we tend to treat this with a different vocabulary. And Tucker, I thought this was a wow-pow speech on his end, because viewers of Tucker know that he's religious. He believes in God. Everybody understood that, but here we have Tucker by the end recommending to listeners and everyone in the world, in fact, to set aside a small piece of their day, not to think about good and evil, and not to think about, the agnostic points about how data context gets presented and what sources of truth are. He says that we should pray. We should pray about the future. And so Tucker is pointing, this isn't just evil and soul and grace. Tucker's being very specific and saying prayer. Now that is something we agnostics do not observe, is prayer. We don't have a personal relationship with God wherein we say, "Dear Lord, please listen to the following," or "help with the following," or "we acknowledge the following." There's not a worship component to what that is for us, whereas it very much is for the Christians of the world. Prayer is a very deep and serious matter for them, and it's also personal, and it's a connection they have with a higher power that gets explored jointly between deity and human. And this is particular what Tucker was referencing. So I was surprised when I heard Tucker's speech that it led to him actually recommending a piece of your day intended in prayer and worship of God. And what would the world be like, one wonders, if people paused during their day and had this prayer? Would it make a difference? What does it mean? Why should we do that? Tucker is, obviously the Christians are going to be on board with his statement. Oh, yes, we'll pray for 10 minutes. Probably they do that anyway, for all I know. But to the rest of the world, it doesn't pray to Jesus for their salvation. Why would we want to sit there and pray for 10 minutes every day? Or what is, I sometimes wonder what a world even looks like when people stop and would pray, if people would do that before a decision they make, or before they go about an important piece of business, or for whatever reason, even if they just pause for a minute and do that. What does the world look like after that? And I have met people who pray in their daily life. And I find it charming because there's a certain beauty to it. I mean, not in a condescending way, but a charming beauty to it, where the person paused to consider what was going to happen in the next 5 minutes or the next day. And obviously they had the self-awareness to pause before this happened, and then take that opportunity to commune. And whether that's, God talking to them or simply reflection upon an important matter, but from the outside, it has a charming beauty to it. And I'm not sure Tucker was wrong that people should pause for 10 minutes and do that. Well, let's hear what LA says. I'd be shocked if he says, well, no, Tucker was wrong about that. We should definitely not pray for 10 minutes. If you hear that from LA, he's probably going to recommend, 10 minutes will not do. It should be 2 hours and 10 minutes. That's what I'm expecting.
Yeah, well, I don't think I'm going to be on record as to tell people that they shouldn't pray. That would be kind of weird from the Christian worldview perspective, I think everyone's probably, if they're aware of our roles on the Open Dialogue podcast, everyone's probably waiting to hear me talk about prayer and the necessity for it. The obvious thing is, how does the agnostic sort of approach this idea, which J. Scott has, at least in limited terms, explained. I'm sure he could go deeper on that if he wanted to, and maybe he will. But we have to ask ourselves, even from the Christian perspective, I think sometimes people within Christianity or outside of it have the wrong idea about what prayer is. I mean, what is the purpose of prayer? And I think it fits well with what Tucker was saying, because the part of prayer is recognizing that there is something over and above outside of yourself, right? And that's what Tucker's sort of getting to. He's getting to this idea that behind the scenes is spiritual good and evil. And, he said it's what's going on is identified and explained by evil. And since he acknowledges that, which he says is obvious, the outcome of that would be to pray. And the reason is because you're going to pray to the good being, God, to overcome the evil, right? Because this is happening, what's going on behind the scenes is happening outside of yourself. What's causing all of the bad things that Tucker says, filth, what were some of the other ones? Disorder.
And lack of peace. Peace was the good list.
Yeah, peace on the good list. Peace is, so the Christian worldview says that all good things come from God. And it also says in Ephesians, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So Tucker is in line with the Christian worldview in the idea that what's going on behind the scenes is impacting what's happening. And so prayer would be a form of worship, not necessarily rubbing the genie in the bottle to just ask for something today, although we do that oftentimes as human beings. And a lot of the perception from the outside of Christianity is that's all that prayer is. It's just, you're asking God to heal you, or that type of thing, asking for good things to happen to you instead of bad things, that type of thing. And some of it is that, but it's not the overall larger purpose of it. You're recognizing that there is a good being in the universe that's responsible for good, and you want this good being to act, because if he doesn't act, you're left with nothing but the bad. And you're not even concerned with what the outcome is, because you know that the outcome is going to be good because it's coming from a good being, that being God in the Christian worldview. And so what emanates from that good being imposes good upon humanity and upon the world, which is what's behind all of the good things that you see. All of the good things that Tucker outlined, one of them being peace, is because that emanates from a good God. And if that good God is not here, then there is no goodness behind the scenes, and then you're left with just the bad. And so that's how prayer is sort of incorporated into this from the Christian worldview, and how it impacts, from a worship standpoint, the goodness that's operating behind the scenes. Now, if you don't believe that there's any of that going on, then why would you pray? Why would you take the 10 minutes? So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be a Christian to pray. Or specifically praying for the purpose of asking for things from God. If you believe in your worldview that what drives the good and bad in the world is spiritual, then you should pray, because that's the only way that you impact the spiritual, and it's the only way that you talk to the spiritual. I'm trying to put this in as non-Christian terms as I can for the
We appreciate that. We appreciate that.
for the agnostic who is my co-host, and all those who you might be listening that don't want me to get too theological on this part. It's spiritualness. That's the key, and the prayer that's behind that.
I wonder, I would like to just imagine for a moment, and we'll get help from LA on this too, because he's going to have theories. But what would the world be like if every single person prayed for 10 minutes a day? What does that even look like? What does that outcome even possibly resemble? And maybe, if the agnostic version of a prayer isn't going to be, dear Lord, thanks for blaming me for problems with Adam and Eve, and now I'm guilty of something and I need help in this and that. That's not going to be how that goes. Maybe it'll be more like, a meditation, a reflective period for 10 minutes. So part of it is what happens when people just pause in their life for 10 minutes and reflect and imagine. But what would it be like if we all did this on the planet and stopped every day for 10 minutes? Every single human being did this. I wonder if we would see something like Tucker has listed out for us. His list of the good had to do with peace, order, cleanliness, and the avoidance of their opposites, chaos, war, and the list would include disorganization, lack of structure, in particular crime, meanness, that kind of thing, dirtiness and filth. If everybody paused for 10 minutes, LA, and prayed, what do you think it would look like on the other side of that on this planet?
Revival, possibly, in a Christian term. Everybody stopping and understanding what might be behind the scenes of what's going on, like Tucker's trying to get to. Idea of good and evil and truth and these concepts from the Tucker Carlson side, from the worldview of a Christian worldview, potentially a biblical worldview, a spiritual worldview. Now we're going to see how this manifests itself from the culture aspect in regards to what went on in Boston this week, something called Satancon 2023, where a fairly large group, about 700,000 or so, got together to discuss their different tenets of what makes them their group and what they think is important in culture, in society, and how they see the world through their lens in regards to truth and does evil exist, and why they call themselves Satanists and that type of thing. And the reason we're bringing this up in contrast to what Tucker was saying and what we talked about in the first part of the podcast is because it's a different take on this. You'll notice some very clear things that sort of relate to a Christian worldview, but they're trying to put it into their own vernacular in the ways that they express it, as far as why they want to tear the system down, why they think changes need to be made, and express themselves in a certain way. And what's behind that? That's what we're going to discuss. So this idea of Satancon, we actually have here on the screen. This is pictures from the event. And what we're primarily interested in is what these folks believe, what their worldview is, and what their tenets are. They have 7 of them, apparently. And they actually list them here. So we're going to talk about them and talk about what this means in regard to what Tucker Carlson was saying and how these two relate and are opposed to each other and what that really means when we're talking about concepts such as good and evil and true and false and those type of things. So any initial comments that you have, J. Scott, on this?
Well, yes, we can say that this particular branch of topic would have not been brought up by me. So I've never heard, not really, of the Church of Satan. Or if I did, it was just in glancing. They don't like the 10 Commandments posted at some courthouse, so they want to have their own thing, something like that. I don't really know much about it, but when I see the photographs of this event in Boston, a couple things come to my mind. This is the hometown of John Adams, the second president of the United States, one of the founding fathers, a very deeply Christian man who lived about 10 miles away in Braintree. But I wonder what he would think of this goofiness in Boston. But then, too, when you look at the pictures, to me it looks like a Halloween-themed costume party. Everybody has a mask and horns, and I kind of would expect sort of something like that to show up at my door on Halloween for candies. Although they are a little bit weird looking. The lady with the ram head is pretty cool because I thought it would be really cool if that was her own hair and if you could somehow get that to work, but it probably just looks like a stuck-on thing. But, I have hair issues, so anybody that can make their hair rock their hair is pretty impressive. That guy probably doesn't have any hair. So if I was going to do it, I might have to do something like that, some glued on sticker thing or whatever that is. But it's hard for me to take this seriously when I see the pictures. It looks like a goofy themed costume party, so it's a little bit like Comic-Con in that sense, but Comic-Con The outfits are more interesting. And it's a cross between that and a Halloween party that you get invited to, and everybody's weird looking and drinks are had. I see a lot of them wearing masks. So maybe they're worried about COVID or something. I don't know, but it's hard for me to take people seriously when they dress like, to be overly rude, but something like a circus or a clown show or a costume party thing. And so
Why do you think they're doing it?
I think they're doing it to draw attention. And so it looks to me like, hey, this is our moment. Everyone's going to take our picture. Look at our cool, weird costume. Look at me. This is my claim to fame for 5 minutes, such as it's ever going to get. And then you had the symbolic stuff of the tearing up of the Bible. And so that's bound to be like, hey, look at me. Not because of who I am, but look what I just did.
Yeah, I think that's more about what it is. I think it's more about going against the norms. It coincides with their tearing down of the structures. We're going to put these outfits on and dress like we're doing, not only for shock value, hey, look at me, but also for a deeper idea of, we know this goes against whatever norm that society has come up with, and that's why we're going to put these type of things on.
I wonder if this event like this has more meaning to a Christian in the sense that there's anti-religious or sacrilegious attempts. These two people are the Hail Satan fans or something like that, and they tear up the Bible, and so there's a symbolism going on. That doesn't really register with me that much. It looks like a bad Jerry Springer episode or something like that to me.
Yeah, I get why that would be, because it sort of looks like that to me too. But I see the message in it. I don't think that they're doing it just because they didn't have anything better to put on before they went to Satancon, or because they're like, oh, if I put this on, then people are going to notice me. I think it has a deeper meaning to it, and maybe it is just the Christian side of me coming out. But I think in relation to what Tucker was saying, I think the deeper idea behind it is, this is the message that we're sending: is we're breaking the norms down. We're going to put these outfits on because it goes against societal norms, and we know it's going to register some sort of impact with people who actually do see the content of it. So I think it does for them anyway, and maybe they would respond to us if they were here and tell me I'm wrong. But I think it has more meaning for that. So let's take a look at the tenets in the last part of the podcast here, about what their message actually is, because they have it right here in black and white for us to see. In addition to their outfits, they have their, unlike Comic-Con, this is Satancon, and even though they say that they don't actually believe in Satan, that they just have some basic tenets showing you what their worldview is. And number one is that one should strive to act with compassion and empathy toward all creatures in accordance with reason. Do you have any comments on number one?
Yeah, number one is the most interesting of the points to me, and because it sounds like a statement that comes out of the French Revolution, and it sounds to me like something that derives from Robespierre's Cult of Reason. And we had an episode early on in our podcast series that regarded Robespierre, and it captures some of the vibe of that. So you don't really need to act with compassion and empathy. It's that you need to do this if it is in accordance with reason. And what does that mean? Well, the implication is probably something vaguely scientific. When people say the Cult of Reason of Robespierre, he would have called it, he would have thought of it as Christian-esque. So there's a structure going on. There's a higher power of some kind going on with Robespierre, however murky. And once we're all on board and follow scientific principles, in particular social science principles, then, with reason, everything will work out. And no one's real particular as to what that means. For Robespierre, it meant whatever he said it did, depending on the day. And his cult of the supreme being thing was him dressing up weird and everyone looking at him fishy because they thought power went to his head, and he was shortly thereafter guillotined. These people, I think, must have stolen this from the Declaration of the Rights of Man or some kind of French document, or a particular Robespierre, and said, well, we'll slap a word like reason on it, and we'll slap a word like empathy on it, and then somehow that'll make it proper. There's nothing really objectionable about being compassionate, empathetic. People can all get that. So, again, they're kind of borrowing this stuff. If they just left it at point number one, I'd be more inclined to let it go because it's a bit generic. And so if you just took that one sentence in isolation, be empathetic toward others, and try to use reason, I don't see anything flagrant about it, although what they mean is make sure you don't get your moral code about good and evil from God. That they don't say that, but that's That's the implication.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the point. The flagrantness of it is meant to be reason supplants God or a moral code that relates to religion in any way. And I think that's what the word reason is stuck in there for. It is vague, but it's purposely vague, I think, in order to be able to put the idea of compassion and empathy onto something without that something being a moral code or God or anything religious. And reason is a nice sounding word that's vague enough where you can push enough stuff in there where they can kind of make it whatever it is that they want, whatever comes out of their reason. Now, the discussion would be if someone from Satancon was sitting here, well, what do you base your reasoning on? And they wouldn't have really anywhere to go with that, I don't think, other than whatever they've come up with that day. And so this is the problem with French Revolution, right? The problem is it's what we humans say it is at the time is what's reasonable. And you have to get in line with whatever we say or off with your head. And that can change 5 minutes from now. It sure changed for Robespierre, who found himself on the chopping block. And that's where that type of thinking leads to. It's where it ends up. It ends up in chaos because this can be ever changing as we go through from 1 minute to the next, from 1 month to the next, from 1 year to the next, from one generation to the next. And these people just kind of want to make up whatever reasonable ideas they have and then make sure that they tear down all of the structures that are aligned with any reason that might go against what they like in the moment. And so I think that's what number one for them is really about. It's about we've tried to replace a moral code with reason, and that reason being whatever we say it is.
Fill in the blank.
Yeah, fill in the blank. Number two, the struggle for justice is an ongoing and necessary pursuit that should prevail over laws and institutions. Your thoughts on that one?
It sounds French Revolutionary too. Out with the laws and institutions, the typical court or the rule of the kingdom. Instead, justice is a broader theme that trumps any of that stuff. So you got to get rid of the old institutions and put justice in. Justice, of course, being a malleable term. One man's justice is not the same as another. So if you're a Robespierre fan and you believe in justice, then it's Danton's head in the basket. If you're post-Robespierre, then it's Robespierre's head in the basket. So justice could be a malleable term. No one has a monopoly on that. Or should I say humans don't have a monopoly on that. And the other thing that I'm drawn to is traditionally in democracies, if the hope and the intent is that justice should be on the same page with the law and the institution. The law is supposed to be just. If it isn't, then you revisit the law, and democracies vote and go through their machinations to make adjustments to the law. But if you just say, oh, well, justice is on my side, well, that could mean anything, and it could mean something violent too, and sometimes it does.
Yeah, and the word necessary popped out for me. Why is this necessary to do? Why as human beings do we find the struggle for justice an ongoing and necessary pursuit? Why is it necessary? What makes it necessary? Why do we need justice? Why is it a struggle? These points, as you've already seen, are very vague, and they're saying things. They're using keywords from in my view, that only come out of a Christian worldview. And oftentimes, secular people that are trying to be secular will borrow from the Christian worldview because they don't have another term to put on it. And they really don't have any reason behind it. They just know, I want justice. I want justice, and I want things to be fair.
No justice, no peace, right?
Yeah, no justice, no peace. But why are you afforded justice? If we're just a bunch of molecules bouncing around in a purposeless vacuum of space, why is justice even something that we're concerned about? I mean, if I just want your stuff and I just come and take it because I'm stronger than you are, who cares? If I go in and I disturb this Satancon with my idea of justice, and I turn their tables over and cause their event to be stopped and cancel them or whatever the case is, why should they get justice for that? Where do we get these concepts from? Well, I think in Tucker's point of view, and certainly in my point of view, these concepts come from outside of us. They're not just stuff that we dreamed up for our purposes of trying to establish reason. These are concepts that we come into contact with because they come from outside of us, not from within us. And so justice is something that we cry out for because we were created in the imago Dei, or the image of God, which justice being a component of, or a attribute of, God. And so we see that. That's what kind of Tucker's saying. That's how these things, that's how the Tucker speech interacts with what we're seeing here. An idea of like justice emanates from the spiritual world.
What does it mean when it's ongoing, too? That's an interesting word, because an ongoing is a thing in motion. It doesn't stop. So the quest for justice is interminable. So you can't just have a just solution and move on.
Yeah, you're never. It's like a solution for racism, or it's just perpetually ongoing. There's never any end.
When you find justice, there's still no peace. You have to keep messing around with it because it's ongoing.
Yeah, there's no terminable end. There's no, oh, here's justice. It's been achieved.
That's right.
Yay. J. Scott and L.A. Lundy came up with the achievement result of justice, and now we're here, and we can all sing Kumbaya and have peace. Where is that in the satanic idea? It's like J. Scott says, it's ongoing. It's never reachable.
I think that fits in with Tucker's model of non-peace and disorganization as on the list of what he calls evil outcomes. So disorganization to me means something that never stops moving, and therefore it's never going to be organized, because it never can be, because it's ongoing no matter what. And so therefore it's rootless. You don't have traditions, you don't put roots, you don't have precedent, you don't learn from the past, you keep having to mess with it each and every day forever. That's chaos, not order.
Right, which is evil. And what's behind that is the evil at work, right? So the reason that this is coming into manifestation is because there's evil behind this that's creating the chaos. That's Tucker's world. That's the Christian worldview on display.
I'm going to call, LA can read it, but I'm just hinting that number 3 is what I call the abortion clause of their 7 tenets.
I'll go ahead and read it.
One's body is inviolable, subject to one's own will alone. So my body, my choice. I get pregnant, I've decided to terminate whatever the contents are of my body regardless, because it's my body. So number 3 to me brings in all the abortionists. That's the way I look at number 3.
And yeah, and so for me, not only does it encompass that, but couldn't we just take that to its logical conclusion? Number 3, one's body is
inviolable, not capable of being violated by others.
It's
an odd word, inviolable.
Yeah, it's an odd word. It's even hard to say, the word, but subject to one's own will alone. So does this just encompass the idea of abortion, or can I take this to the conclusion of basically I can do anything that I want to do, anything that I can will, like anything that I can will into being out of myself, I should be able to do. Who said that? Like who gives you that ability to will something into existence, and then I can't tell you not to do that? I mean, number 3 seems to go pretty far-reaching.
Number 3 contradicts some of the other points on their platform too. So if your body is inviolable, but I'm blurring through into the other issues because it directly applies to number 3. But in number 4, you're not supposed to encroach upon the freedoms of another. So the abortion case is very interesting because there are 2 creatures and cohabitating this larger person, and there's another person in there too. So it's your body, and it's inviolable based on your will, but do you ask the child what it wants with its body? And if you mess with it, you're violating the tenet of number 4, encroaching upon the freedom of the other person, because the presumption is, in the absence of a statement, that other person doesn't want their body to be violated either, but you're doing that if you go with an abortion. So it also blurs with number 5 because you're not supposed to distort scientific facts. And the scientific fact is very clear. That's a life form. That's what a fetus is. It's not a bag of potatoes. It's a living thing.
The agnostic's going to struggle with, the true agnostic will struggle with point number 5.
Point number 5 is the most hurtful for an agnostic, I can tell you that. I don't know if we're ready to move through number 4, but in the case of number 4, the French Revolution their motto is liberté, égalité, fraternité, and liberty, equality, and brotherhood. But liberty and equality contend with each other. And so if you want equality, that means every person is equal in every way. Does that mean they're identical? And if your liberty infringes upon somebody else, what happens if liberty is your main goal, but you're infringing upon the guy next to you's liberty? Somebody's liberty is getting infringed. And in the liberty equality balance, somebody's liberty and equality are always going to be infringed. So they're borrowing some of this stuff out of the French Revolution terminology, and then seem to be having a misunderstanding of the problem. Freedom, if that's a combination of liberty and equality, then that is a needle that needs to have thread. You need to thread that needle, and it's not crystal clear when people's liberties conflict upon one another what should be done, or what equality means. In particular, in today's world, does it mean equity, a different word with a different meaning? So that's, for me, that's number 4, and LA can remark upon it further if he wishes to. But number 5 is the kicker. You conform to your best scientific understanding of the world. Belief should conform to one's best understanding. Well, the thing about science is it doesn't really have anything to do with somebody's belief. That's not a scientific principle. That's not a matter of belief. So to try to ascertain it and say that science is based on someone's belief, well, who is that someone, and why do they believe that? We went through this whole thing with COVID, and we've been through it in foreign policy, academia, and many other spheres of culture in post-2020 world. The idea that science is controlled by you, that's a Fauci thing. I am science. And that is the opposite of how science works. Science doesn't belong to anybody or their beliefs. These are things that are measurable, verifiable, and they're notions of learning that can become more evolved as understanding increases. But these things are tested, and they have nothing to do with the beliefs of somebody. And they shouldn't be, because that is a weaponization of science. And by definition, when you weaponize it based on your own belief, then you've already misunderstood how science works, because that's a disconnect.
Yeah, so the other thing I'd like to know is if you have a worldview that doesn't incorporate any kind of spiritual understanding of good and evil actually existing, any absolute truths in the world, and we're just kind of making these 7 tenets up as we go, then where does this idea of freedom even come into in point number 4? Why should we respect the freedom of anybody else? Well, you say, well, you're a human being and I'm a human being. You should respect me just out of common courtesy because it works best for society. These different ideas we come up with for why freedom is necessary. But that doesn't really cut it, because, if I'm bigger than you, I take your freedoms away. Or if I have a different concept of what my freedom means, then I can implement that concept.
Until someone even bigger sets it another way, right? There's always a bigger fish. So you implement your idea of freedom or justice and impose that upon someone when somebody bigger than you will do
that's
the same.
not respecting freedom. That's just me taking your freedoms away. Why is that wrong to do? If it's just a survival of the fittest mentality, like something out of the animal kingdom, what does it matter if I take your quote freedom away? I'm just bigger than you are. I'm just surviving in this purposeless world. Why is it so important to these people about freedom? I know why freedom is important to me, because I'm made in the image of God. I'm a human being with value because of that. And regardless if you believe in Christianity or Jesus or any of that stuff, you are also made in the image of God. And because of that, you have value, and life has value, and there's certain freedoms that emanate from that. So once again, we get to this idea that you either have a source for these things that you can point to and that you can understand them in light of, or you get vague tropes like this that people are just coming up with because they're either using words like science and freedom because they sound good, and because they think they're important for whatever reason, because they understand, well, gee, I want to have freedom and I want you to respect my freedom. But what does that actually mean when you get to a little bit of a deeper concept of what freedom is? And they always are putting this idea of will in there. Even number 4 has it.
Will is a mighty expression, both in German philosophy and in the French Revolution. In the case of freedom, maybe we should just borrow from Janis Joplin. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Or maybe we could modify it and say freedom means the freedom to beat your ass because I can. Is that, you could take freedom and then insert these different notions with it, but still steal, borrow, use the term, and empower yourself with the language, because now you're talking about freedom. So now the discussion has to do with what your sense of what that means and not anyone else's.
Yeah, and also notice at the bottom of number 4 is to willfully and unjustly encroach upon the freedoms of another is to forego one's own freedom. Yeah. So now if you step on whatever I've decided is my freedom to do whatever I want to do, well, then I'm going to decide what that is and then take whatever that is away from you.
It's quite a predicament, especially when there's two creatures living in the same body. That makes it astounding and insoluble. Talk about an insoluble problem. You have two living creatures and they both want to live, and now what happens?
Yeah.
The bigger one kills off the littler one, apparently.
Yeah, I guess. Well, that's the survival of the fittest mentality. These people want to move above and beyond survival concepts into this world of freedom and justice, but they have no foundational moorings for these things. They can just make them up as they go, and voila, we have freedom. And don't encroach on my freedom, whatever that is. Otherwise, I'm going to take your whatever that is away, and it's whatever I say it is. So if I want to have an abortion, and I want to, then if you encroach on my ability to do so, then what do I get to do to you back? Do you forego your rights in some way? And who gives rights anyway? These rights, like freedom as a right, like where do these rights emanate from?
Well, we
if
see
they're
it
just
in the
human
Constitution.
based, I can just take yours away.
There is a reference in our Constitution to where these rights come from.
Yeah, gee, I wonder what that might be.
It wasn't the Satanic Temple or the whatnots. that wasn't. I can tell you. I'll give you an agnostic shortcut. That was not on the list of the founding fathers' origins for where these come from. These rights.
Well, we obviously need to tear that stuff down. We need to tear up that Constitution along with the Bible that they tore up. The pages in the Bible.
If they did
tear
that
the
to the
Constitution up
Constitution,
too.
now you would have my.
Yeah.
You know, the tearing up of the holy thing of the Bible, to me, is bad form. It's a publicity stunt. It's also myopic and a little bit ignorant. And then, but if you did that to the U.S. Constitution, now you would have more specific ire on my part. There's only 4 copies of it. So which one did you just tear up, or one?
Yeah, and imagine if they would have torn up the pages of the Quran.
If they would have torn up the pages of the Quran, we would have a big problem at the Satanic Temple or whatnot, because they don't like that. And they're not nice about it, and they're not tolerant about it.
Yeah, these tolerant Christians will tear their book up because
you're supposed to turn the other cheek, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think the Muslims do that. I'm not a big Quran person, but I feel like that's not a Muslim
not the
thing.
radicalized ones anyway. Okay, well, hey, number 6 is something I can agree with, J. Scott. People are fallible. What do you think about that?
I think the first sentence is good. The other part's a little murky. But I do like the idea. If you mistake, you try your best to rectify or reconcile. If you did wrong somebody, then you should attempt to resolve the harm therein. That seems like number 6 is probably the best of the tenets, from what I can tell.
Yeah, although I'm still unclear as to why we need a resolution to harm caused. I mean, what if the harm that I caused works out well for me?
What if it was just? And
what
part
if
of
I
your
deem
freedom.
it? What if I deem it as just? And part of my freedom is to interact with you in such a way that impedes on whatever things that you have, so that I can have them instead.
I'd like to resolve this, but there's really no need because it's just, and I'm expressing my freedom upon your face, because I'm bigger than you and I can. Boom.
Yeah, there's no absolutes. There's no absolutes here. And number 7, every tenet is a guiding principle designed to inspire nobility. There's another nice word.
That's a fancy
nobility.
French word too.
Every tenet, yeah, lots of French words coming out here. Every tenet is a guiding principle designed to inspire nobility in action and thought. The spirit of compassion, wisdom, and justice should always prevail over the written or spoken word. So now here is where number 5 gets to you. Number 7 gets to me, because we've decided that the spirit of compassion, wisdom, and justice need to prevail over written or spoken words.
Even if those words are full of compassion, wisdom, and justice. That's the real pickle for me.
But isn't the problem that in this worldview that words like nobility and compassion and wisdom are just words? Aren't they just words anyway? So if we get rid of the written and spoken word, where does that leave these words at if there's no underlying source of validity for them?
Well, the other curiosity I had about number 7 with this written word, it seems to me the Bible makes this point. God is the Word and the Word is God. And I wonder if these Satanic Temple people, when they say it needs to prevail over the Word, I wonder if they're secretly or implying a reference to the Bible as the Word. God is the Word is God type of thing.
Yeah, I think you're hitting the nail on the head there. I think it's a direct attack against not only the Bible and God, but also, because of that, it attacks the tenets, the principles that this country, and for that point, anything really is built on. So the spoken word in Christian circles. The written and spoken word is the underlying base for everything. It's the underlying base for creation, ex nihilo, the world was created, ex nihilo, by God. And the written word is the foundation for all these principles: justice, forgiveness, grace, nobility. All of these things emanate from the written word, and that was based on the spoken word. So it's another, not only attack on God, but a way that they are able to bring down the very foundations of everything that is built, everything that was built upon. But in so doing, they contradict themselves, because their words really are meaningless in their worldview, because there's no basis or underlying structure. So really, it's just words. It's just words that they're using to try and get across concepts that actually have a base in reality. As Tucker was pointing out, the spiritual world is the basis for reality. What we see in the physical world emanates from that world, emanates from the being of God, and evil emanates from spirituality, spiritual wickedness in high places. These types of concepts have real basis in reality. But for these people, they don't. For these people, it's just words that they're using to express concepts that they want to employ but have no basis for. So if you get rid of the words, if you get rid of the spoken word or the written word, what is left for these Satanist people in reality? What's left for them? Nothing, as far as I can tell.
Well, that's why it's an ongoing process. So you make sure there are no roots or frames of references, no traditions. Even if somebody in the past got it right and wrote it down, we're not to learn from that, because we're ongoing. So that every time you feel like it, you just tear up whatever the thing is in front of you and make up the rules as you go along. And this is going to be done differently depending on who's the bigger, stronger fish that's imposing their freedoms upon you, on your face. To put this in, let's do a little, talk about reality. Let's do a little reality check on these Church of the Satan Temple thing, and their weird costume parties, and or whatever this is, horn people and tearing up at the Bible and throwing money all over the place to get their moment. And they have wristbands and leather strap-on things and other weird ram heads and stuff like that. But these are they have holidays. Okay, so this will help put it in perspective a little bit. And many of these, I have no idea what they are. Lupercalia, but one of them's Hexennacht, so that must be you put a hex at night. I think that sounds like a German thing. Unveiling Day, Sol Invictus, and Halloween. So you know Halloween's their most important holiday. And then you also know the membership of this church, this temple, was it 700,000 people? 700,000 people say it's the membership of this movement. That should help you put it in perspective. 700,000 people is very smaller by orders of magnitude than the Christian church or human population or the U.S. population. 700,000, I don't know what the population of Boston is, but you could say 700,000 people might be a third of Boston, and nobody else in America believes this. And I don't even know if all these 700,000 people believe it. I bet you half of them are showing up to the costume party, and not everyone's sitting here dissecting tenet number 5 and 7 and applying it to the Constitution of the French Revolution and stuff like that. So, you know, the Christians in their history, in the history of Christianity, Christians have faced deep and powerful persecutions. Quite famously, and particularly under the Roman Empire, for example. And some stunt costume party like this, compared to facing down the Roman Empire and messing around with Colosseums and lions and all the rest of it, this seems like kids' play. Now, maybe it's a subterfuge really for a deeper and more important movement, but from the outside, this doesn't look to me on the same level of the persecutions of Nero or the purging of religion out of the states of the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany. To me, this is... I hope I'm not wrong about this, but it looks a little bit stunty and not worthy of a threat to the essence of Christian organization or values. It's too minor and anecdotal. That's what I think.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if it's how minor or anecdotal it is. It may, in the grand scheme of things, just be a blip on the radar. But it does, I agree with Tucker mostly on the idea that what you see here with this group in Boston, the Satanist group, who, by the way, doesn't believe that Satan exists.
Yeah, that's an amazing thing. Parse that out for me, even if it takes one sentence. But they're Satanists, but they don't believe in Satan. So now they say it's a literary Satan. I have no idea what that means. But they dog me on science. They dog me on history. They dog me on the Constitution. They irritated my Christian friend deeply. And now they want to pull into question that it's literary. Whatever the hell that means. But now they're trying to incorporate literariness too. We don't really believe in Satan. We just write about it like we do or something like that. And they're somehow implying that's a part of a literary movement.
Well, I think what they're meaning to try and get to is that they don't want to say that Satan is real, like Anton LaVey back in the 60s, who actually had the Satan temple and worshiped Satan. They don't want to go there because then they would have to acquiesce to the idea that a spiritual world exists. And I don't think they want to do that. And that's where they're getting back to their point 5 of, only talking about beliefs that tie into science, which is a silly statement in and of itself. But I think that's where they're going with it. So Satan becomes just the antithesis of everything that we thought was good. So it's the tearing down of the idea of good being connected with God or spirituality in some way. And their idea of Satan is just an attack on that type of thing. So we're just going to come up with our own ideas of what things are, in antithesis to the concepts of good, the Judeo-Christian concept of good. And so the attack on that basically is Satan in a literary speak. And so that's what we are. It's kind of bizarre, but I think that's where they're going with it, which I get, because when you have this worldview, you kind of have to, like you said, make this stuff up as you go. So they have to tie themselves in with something that has shock value and something that's going to give them some press time and something that actually tries to put forward who they are without actually acquiescing to an idea of a spiritual being named Satan, and that spiritual actually exists, which is Tucker's point in over against this, that Satan does exist, that evil does exist outside of ourselves as an absolute thing that manifests itself into this type of thing.
It's pretty weird. If it's not satanic, then why call it satanic temple? So that's a misnomer. That we're satanic, but we're not satanic. And then if it's not religious, then why call it a temple? Because that's what that is. So it's a non-religious thing that is religious, except that it isn't, in a place that's non-religious, except when it is, but it really isn't. That whole kind of thing is a jumbling. I think they're trying to pick a sensitive issue like the church and Satan, the cast down angel of God, reigning over an evil earth, and they're trying to jerk the chains of the Christian. I swear these people are trying to get... I don't think they're designed to irritate me. I think their platform is designed to irritate you, LA, because...
Well, I think so. That's why you have things like this that they have in their temple, You're going to tell me that they're not trying to get towards some sort of spiritual idea of the throne that, that they're sitting on, in this kind of affront to the throne of God, or a throne or a chair, someone like this in an actual temple.
It looks like a fashion show gone really bad. Maybe these people should have been on the Met Gala and gone with the weird horn hats and other kind of fishy pants.
Well, that's just another manifestation of it, right? So I think that this is satanic myself. I think that this is evil, just like Tucker Carlson would say that this type of display is an evil manifestation of what evil actually is, which is disorder, chaos, and some of the other.
It's also ludicrous, goofy, and laughable. Who would have known that evil would look so stupid? When I think of evil, I think of it something better, be impressive. If it's a worthy antithesis to good. But I see this, and I'm like, this looks like latex and weird panties and goofy hats. I don't know how you're not supposed to laugh at this. It's hard to take it seriously when the guy looks like, he came out of a G-rated porn movie with weird horns and goofy colored hair. That it's just funny looking to me. I don't know. Maybe evil works in a certain way that says, hey, I want you to think, J. Scott, this isn't really evil. It's supposed to make you laugh. Well, if that's the intent of evil, then they got it on me. I think it's laughable.
Although I agree it's laughable, I don't think it's just about the horns and the silly outfits and whatever the case is. I think it has more to do with, look, this is chaos. This is disorder. This is a bringing down of norms. This is anti-foundational. I'm just putting things on in display of myself that I think are against norms. And it's goofy and it's crazy and chaotic and silly, because that's what evil is. I mean, that's how it manifests itself, against order, cleanliness, godliness, peacefulness. These we're going to get up and we're going to violently rip pages out of a book, out of a Bible, a holy book, the Bible, because that's disorder. It's chaotic. It's all those things that Tucker says, rightly so, are evil, and what Scripture says.
I'm going to come up with a contrary.
Manifestations of it.
I'm going to wind down my section with a contrary point of view to LA on this. Maybe this isn't evil that we're looking at. Maybe these are people who didn't make the final guest list of the Met Gala in New York City, and they had some costumes, but it just wasn't cutting it because it sucked. And they're like, okay, we didn't get into Met Gala this year. We don't get to see Rihanna and Doja Cat and all these other people, and we're really pissed off. So what we're going to do is dress up in our goofy outfits that didn't make the cut, and then we're going to tear up the Bible to make sure we irritate all the Christians and get somebody's attention, because no one will look at us because we weren't good enough to make the Met Gala. There you go.
Well, I would actually hope it would be as simple as that. It's just the disgruntled people that were off the guest list at the Met Gala that also happened this week, with all the crazy outfits and silliness going on there as well. Also a manifestation of just chaos and disorder and things like that. I wish it would be that easy. I think it probably is more than that. It probably is more to do with the concept of evil and everything that surrounds that Tucker was talking about in his speech, which fits with my worldview. But maybe you're right. Maybe it is just as simple as these are disgruntled people that want to dress up in funny costumes.
Because they didn't make the main cut, because their outfits are too ghetto. That's why they didn't make it. They're chintzy, they're plastic. I don't know, I'm not a fashion critic, so they all kind of look the same to me, whether they're at the Met Gala or this. But the fashion people thought it wasn't right. Last episode, we heard my outsider interpretation of Revelations 11. This time, you get to hear my interpretation of the Satanic Temple. As an outsider, it looks like they didn't make the Met Gala because their costumes sucked.
That may be a secondary. That may be something secondarily. But anyway, that's our take on good and evil as it relates to Tucker's speech and the Satancon folks. I hope it was helpful for you and your own ideas of good and evil, and will make you think a little bit about what those actually mean and what it actually means in reality. And we're interested to hear your thoughts on it. Good and evil, are they just concepts that we can that are malleable, that we can just sort of make them whatever we want to be? Or is it something that's actually in reality behind those concepts that we should pray about? That, and if you're a non-religious person, that you should think about for longer than 10 minutes, and how you actually manifest that into the world. So we can bring this into a Christian worldview through the idea of prayer, like Tucker Carlson, or we can also talk about this in a more agnostic way, as far as how are you going to represent good and evil in our world? Are you going to do it with horns on your head and funny costumes that promote chaos and disorder? Are you going to do it in invoking concepts of the French Revolution that led to disaster, and historically speaking have always led to disaster? Or are we going to go back to basically Judeo-Christian concepts that the country was built on, and that has served us well all the way up until now, when we feel like we need to tear all those down? These are concepts that in reality actually mean something. And I think Tucker's point is well taken on that, in regards to, maybe we need to take some time to either pray or think about those things. So hopefully the podcast was beneficial to you. We hope you'll come back for more Up Your Dialogue podcasts in the future. We hope to be doing this on a more regular basis now with the concept of video. And look for our YouTube channel. We also post on Twitter from time to time, and on other social media channels that are yet to be acknowledged now that we have the concept of video in place. So we thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you on the next one.
This